case file, The Levitical Tithe, the law, the land, and the missing context.
You know, when most of us hear the word tithe, we're told it's pretty simple, 10% of your income. But here's the thing, the only place God actually lays it down as law is in the Levitical system. And that system was way more specific than many of us were ever shown.
Yep, that's the modern definition, right? It's become the baseline understanding for millions. The rule seems simple and universal. Give 10% of whatever you earn.
But here's the big question for our investigation today. Does that modern idea perfectly line up with the ancient command? Is it possible that some key pieces of evidence have been, well, kind of overlooked? There's really only one way to find out. We've got to get into the text and open the file.
Okay, first things first. We've got to go straight to the source, the primary evidence. We're going to set aside all the assumptions and just look at what the law itself actually says.
And boom, here it is. Now people might point to Abraham or Jacob, but this verse in Leviticus, this is the first time the tithe is formally legislated. And I want you to notice the really specific categories here. Tithe of the land, seed of the land, and fruit of the trees. The language is super concrete, and it's pointing to something very, very specific.
So when you start collecting all the descriptions of the tithe from the law, this powerful pattern just jumps off the page. It's a tithe of the land, the seed, the trees. Deuteronomy even adds, "You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year." I mean, the evidence is just overwhelmingly agricultural.
So knowing what was tithed, that's only half the story. Now we need to understand the blueprint. How did the system actually work on the ground back in ancient Israel? Who was it for? And maybe most importantly, why?
And this is absolutely crucial. The tithe had a very specific, designated recipient. The book of Numbers tells us, "To the Levites I have given every tithe in Israel for an inheritance." Why? Because they didn't get an allotment of land like the other tribes. This wasn't some generic church budget, it was a foundational piece of Israel's entire national and religious infrastructure.
And this is a layer of complexity that is almost completely missed in modern conversations. We talk about the tithe, but it wasn't just one single 10% payment. The law actually outlines at least 3 distinct tithes. You had the annual Levitical tithe for their inheritance, an annual festival tithe that the people themselves ate in celebration, and then this special third-year tithe that was set aside for the poor and the needy.
The timing of it all also followed the rhythm of the land itself. You had your annual harvest tithe, that special distribution every 3rd year, and, as we see in Leviticus 25, the 7th year Sabbath, where the land got to rest and all sowing just stopped. This is the clockwork of an agricultural society, not a bi-weekly payroll deduction.
Now, a common question that comes up is, well, maybe they just didn't have money back then. But, that's just not historically accurate. They absolutely used silver and gold for commerce. And yet when God legislates the tithe, the command always consistently points back to the yield of the land. What the text doesn't clearly lay out is a standing percentage requirement on wage income.
Okay, so we've established the original blueprint, but what happens when we turn the page into the New Testament? Well, the entire landscape shifts. The temple system is gone, the Levitical priesthood is fulfilled in Christ, and the church isn't a land-based nation anymore. Everything is different.
I mean, this side-by-side comparison really makes the shift crystal clear. Under the Levitical law, you had this legally mandated land-based obligation that was tied into a whole national infrastructure. But in the New Covenant, the language completely changes. It's all about willing, Spirit-led generosity for the support of the church. The whole mechanism is just fundamentally different.
And this verse right here, this is what defines that new paradigm. The Apostle Paul puts the emphasis squarely on the internal motivation of the person giving. It's about the decision made in the heart, and he explicitly says it should not be done reluctantly or under compulsion. The focus totally moves from an external law to an internal cheerfulness.
Okay, so this is always the practical question that comes up, isn't it? After seeing all this evidence, does it mean people are supposed to stop giving 10%? Is that wrong now? And here's where we really need to reframe the conversation. The issue has never been about whether a believer can give 10%. Of course you can. The real question is one of prescription. Was that specific land-based Levitical law directly transferred as a binding requirement for the New Covenant Church? That's the heart of the whole debate.
All right, we've reviewed the primary sources, we've examined all the context. It's time to put it all together, synthesize the evidence from our case file, and deliver the final verdict.
So let's just summarize it all.
what the text clearly shows is a tithe that was legislated under Moses, tied directly to the land of Israel, designed to support the Levites, and that it involved multiple functions. Now, what the text does not clearly establish is a tithe on weekly income, a universal salary percentage, or a direct transfer of that specific law as a mandate for the church. So our verdict on the nature of the Levitical tithe is this. It was fundamentally land-based. It was centered on agriculture. It was specific to the Old Covenant with the nation of Israel. It was structured for a nation. And its timing was rhythmic, based on seasons and harvests, not paychecks.
To put it in our official case file language, the law is confirmed. It's right there in the text. The context has often been dramatically reduced, stripping it of its agricultural framework. The application has been expanded way beyond its original scope. And because of that, the mandate, as it is often taught, absolutely requires careful testing against the evidence.
You know, the goal of this investigation isn't just to close a case file. It's to encourage a certain way of thinking. You got to remember the Bereans. They were praised as being noble, not for just blindly accepting what they were taught, but because they went back to the primary sources themselves to see if it was actually true.
So this really becomes your mandate. Don't panic when a long-held belief gets challenged. Investigate it. Don't just assume that what you've heard is the whole story. Examine the evidence for yourself. And probably most importantly, don't outsource the responsibility of understanding what God has revealed in His own Word.
We have laid out the evidence, we have put the common teaching to the test against the text, and so for our purposes today, this case is closed. And the final takeaway, the one thing to remember from all of this, is pretty simple. The biblical tithe, as legislated in the law, followed the land, not the paycheck.
If the cross put it to death, we tag it, tow it, and refuse to resurrect it. Share it if it helped you. Subscribe if someone else needs it. We sow truth the way Jesus taught, not the way man demands.